All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
Oh, you're muted, Michael. Good morning, everyone.
Yeah. How am I muted?
Oh, now you aren't.
Yeah, I don't think
now
I
you're good.
Muted. All right, I'm good.
Okay.
Well, hopefully the day gets better than the start on the Mark Thompson Show. Michael Shure here. It is Thursday. Mark will be back on Tuesday. I've been lying to you all week without knowing it because they made a change. The show will be dark on Monday, but Mark will be back on Tuesday. You got to suffer through the Shure, McAllister, and Rivasura administration one more day here on the Mark Thompson Show. We do have a good show for you. We have a lot to discuss, some sad news, some big political news, some interesting judicial news. David Katz will be joining us later in the show. We also will have 48 seconds of sports, which I grudgingly think will have to be about basketball, which I'm not a big fan of. But Albert, I think I'd be derelict in my duties were I not to talk about basketball today. So I'll even do that. But let's start with something big and beautiful. Like like a bill. The United States House of Representatives, Kim, today passed. And look, we fall for it once in a while. I think a lot of us are so cynical that we don't fall for it anymore. The posturing of different groups within the Republican caucus saying this will not pass. We cannot pass this, yada, yada, yada. Well, what happened? The bill passed by one vote. Remember,
in the dead of night.
In the dead of night. They can lose two votes, can the Republicans here, and they lost one. And then Andy Harris, a representative from Maryland, who was one of the aforementioned people who said at every turn, this bill cannot pass. It adds too much to the deficit. It is too much it does not cut enough from Medicaid. All of that. And I have problems with the state and local taxes. There are members of my caucus who will not pass this. And what happened? The bill passed. Harris voted present, which means it won by one vote. Had he voted against it, a tie, of course, would have meant that it was rejected, and it would have been a big defeat for both the president and the speaker as it stands. And I would give this big victory to the president, I think, more than the speaker, because all that happened was some members of the caucus went to the president yesterday, and I wasn't there, but I know that he said, you got to pass this. We'll get by the other stuff. We'll look at it later. We got to pass this or else we're doomed and we're never going to win the House. Now, Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrats, there's a silver lining to every bad piece of news when it comes to politics. For example, when Roe versus Wade was overturned, it energized a huge swath of voters that then changed the face of Congress, changed special elections, and while it didn't impact the presidential race that happened 4 or 2 years later, it certainly made a big difference immediately. So what this does is the parts of this bill that are so devastating to so many people will, in the estimation of the Democrats, help them to win back the House in 2 years and make this sort of a half presidency for Donald Trump. That said, Trump got what he wanted. The bill is passed. Mike Johnson, to his credit as speaker, did what he had to do to get this bill through. It was not easy being Mike Johnson. Whatever you think of the guy, whoever has the job of Speaker of the House at this period with that Republican caucus has a very difficult task because there are disparate factions of that caucus, and there are purple state Republicans and there are very, very far right Republicans who, if they step into every piece of legislation, nothing would get passed. So you got to give the speaker a little bit of credit. It now goes to the Senate, where it will be chopped up a bit, and it's we'll see where it goes from there. But it is, in fact, a bill that has passed, and a bill that has many concerning parts to it that we've gone over this week, Kim. But really, the biggest part of this, what hits home the most, and what will be shoved down our throats as political consumers over the next few years, at least a year and a half, is going to be the cuts to Medicaid and the rising deficit. And Republicans are supposed to be deficit hawks, but that's not what happens here.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of the holdouts, Representative Massey, had a lot to say about what the debt will bring to the country. Should we take a look at that video?
Yeah, Thomas Massey of Kentucky, who often goes against his party. Yeah, let's take a listen.
It's so interesting that here, Albert has the video. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'd love to stand here and tell the American people, we can cut your taxes and we can increase spending and everything's going to be just fine. But I can't do that because I'm here to deliver a dose of reality. This bill dramatically increases deficits in the near term, but promises our government will be fiscally responsible 5 years from now. Where have we heard that before? How do you bind a future Congress to these promises? This bill is a debt bomb ticking. Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg. If something is beautiful, you don't do it after midnight. I oppose this bill.
Gentleman's time has expired.
You resigned as an actor.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, yeah. So you hear Thomas Massey, to whom, Thomas Massey, there's a lot that one can say about Thomas Massey, but he stuck to his guns. Chip Roy, who for days now has been saying there's no way this can pass, there's no way I can vote for it, there's no way I can vote for it, found a reason to vote for it. And it's a bill that is full of cuts. It's cuts into, Medicaid. It's cuts into food stamps. It's making, the tax cuts permanent from 2017. And it would cut taxes on tips and overtime, but only temporarily. That doesn't stay in the rest of the cuts. It's a very, very big bill. Whether it's beautiful or not depends on whose eyes are looking at it, but there's no question, you can't challenge the fact that it is a big bill. Slashing Medicaid by $700 billion, and the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, says that will go even higher. That is a massive cut, $270 billion cut from food stamps. This is really demonizing the poor. It is demonizing the elderly, and it is a very, very difficult it's difficult to understand politically how this will benefit Republicans. And I would argue that purple and blue state Republicans who supported this bill are going to have a very, very difficult time defending it next year when they're up for re-election. This is, in many ways, although it is a bitter pill to swallow for a lot, it is a gift to Democrats if they can figure out how to use that gift. It is a gift to Democrats running for election and re-election.
Vilma writes, what really is horrible is that most of the bill takes effect in 2029, right after the next presidential election, and that the Dems get stuck again. I didn't realize that they had, put a time frame in there.
Yeah, well, there are, and that's what happens with budget bills too, is you're doing them in advance. I always say this about legislation, is that there are ways to undo legislation. There are not ways to undo, and executive orders, there are not ways to undo some of the sort of intangible effects that Trump has had on policy. If the Democrats win the House, they can stop the bleeding. They can put in new initiatives. If there's a Democratic president elected in 2028, they can have legislation that, while not undoing this legislation, can usurp this legislation, that can put in targets that are unattainable, therefore cutting the knees out from this legislation. That can happen, and it certainly will happen. The other thing to remember is this does go to the Senate. It has to come back to the House for another vote. Some of these people who have positioned themselves as opposed to the bill, when it comes back from the Senate, may sort of reintroduce their opposition. John is asking, will the big, beautiful bill pass the Senate? It's not going to pass the Senate without being chopped up and cut up a lot. There's going to be opposition to some of these things, no question, both from Republicans and Democrats. John also says, I wouldn't mind as much if they were cutting lots of services to bring down the deficit somewhat, but to cut the services and raise the deficit because of tax cuts to the rich is tragic. And that's the bottom line here. John hits it point blank. It is the fact that they are offsetting this rather than offsetting it with tax hikes. They're offsetting it with tax cuts, which doesn't offset it, right? It is saying that the richest among us have to pay less in taxes, yet we are still cutting these things. It makes what Ronald Reagan did in the 80s hideous. D. Elliott writes, Kim, could we talk about the item in the big BS bill that states that courts cannot hold the administration in contempt of court? That's the scariest part. Yeah, what D. Elliott is talking about is a provision that takes away from the courts. And this is a big part of why the Supreme Court has been able to step in, why any court has been able to step in and be the last line of defense with the triple crown belonging to the Republicans in terms of the Senate, the House, and the White House, is that the courts have been able to step in and hold them either in contempt or saying that what they're trying to do is extra constitutional. Well, this bill does take that. That really it's like a hidden provision in this bill that takes the ability to hold the administration or the president in contempt, takes it away, and that is a really scary thing. So it seeks to limit the ability of the courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, from enforcing their orders. No court of the United States may use appropriated funds to enforce, and I'm reading from the bill, to enforce a contempt citation for failure to comply with an injunction or temporary restraining order if no security was given when the injunction or order was issued. Again, this is something that I will talk to David Katz about if I can. We have a lot to talk to him about later. But basically, this provision would make most existing injunctions in antitrust cases, police reform cases, and school desegregation cases and others unenforceable. That's from Erwin Chemerinsky, who's the dean of Berkeley Law. It serves no purpose but to weaken the power of the federal courts. And it is, in fact, a dangerous part of this. What happens to it in the Senate, I don't know. But there are a lot of people that will look at what the Senate is doing. And when the Senate, as they look at what the Senate is doing, they're going to look to see whether or not Republicans in the Senate, whether or not Democrats in the Senate see this as something that can be amended or can be taken care of before it comes back to the House, I'm sure, because there's going to be some outrage. The more you learn about this provision of the big, beautiful bill, there's going to be some outrage, Kim.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are talking about the that provision you just mentioned and are scared that it might further the thought that we have some type of fascism or authoritarianism on the way in. And I don't know if, and maybe you're better to answer this procedurally, if the House passes a bill or if the Senate keeps that in and somehow this becomes signed into law the way it is, if this goes against the Constitution, can the courts nullify that portion of it? Or does it, if the Congress passes it, does it stand?
First of all, if Congress passes it, I believe it has to stand because there's no legislative power that the court has. That said, I'm not sure, and I mean it sincerely because I just don't know. A, I'm not a legal scholar, and B, this is new. I'm not sure what can be acted upon by the courts in terms of, I think there will be challenges to this as not being constitutional, and then the court can entertain it. But does this, paralyze the court in such a way that even if the court rules that that it is extra constitutional, that can they enforce it? Right. So it's like this circle that they go in. I think that Congress and the courts would stay away from enforcing that. It really is in a way making the president the king in this case.
Right. Yeah.
And again, that goes back to talking about fascism. We don't talk about it as monarchy because there's nothing elegant about it. It is basically a takeover through a rising up of people who are trying to change. And basically, this is saying we can ignore the Constitution. So I do think that it will be, of course, challenged. But how that works, I simply don't know. I mean, I'm being
Right.
honest with everybody here.
Mhm.
It's not something that I know. I know the
Yeah.
politics of stuff, but I just don't know that. And I never like to say, oh, yes, this is going to happen when I don't know. But it is certainly, and I'm glad that D. Elliott brought it up, it is certainly
Mhm.
something to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the next several days and whether or not the Senate changes it because they do that, right? As you mentioned, they can change it. They can, send it back to committee. They can do all these kinds of things that make the bill look a lot different than it is right now.
Yeah, that's true. I think that that's why there's a process in place here.
Mhm,
The bill that the House will vote on final passage will be different than the bill that they voted on
mhm.
today. That said, I don't see I don't know what they're
Mhm.
going to do to these certain provisions. And my
Mhm.
guess is that senators who have to run for reelection in their state are going to be much more concerned about the stuff we talked about earlier, Medicaid, food stamps, that sort of thing,
Yeah.
than they're going to be concerned because we said that yesterday with John Rothman that
Mhm.
when you talk about Medicaid and you talk about food stamps, that isn't about party politics. That's just about people who live in your state or your district who
Yeah.
who think about their next meal more than they think about whether they support a Republican or a Democrat. But
Mhm.
Republicans want their votes as well. So that's what I think is going to. I think that's going to impact. Those changes will be impacted most in the Senate.
I can see the stories right now, the food banks, begging for more donations because more people will be headed there because the poorest among us won't have access to food stamps or, the safety net that they need. And I really worry about the people that are struggling, the kids that don't have enough to eat, that, right now in California, they have a continuation of what was going on with COVID, where they give free lunch to kids, every kid that needs it. And I don't know if things like that will continue or for how long. And I feel like, the
Yeah.
COVID money is going to expire. And so things like, making sure kids have enough to eat, it's like the most basic thing we can do for people. I don't know. I don't
Right.
understand how these people that voted for the bill can be okay with it. And not only are they okay with it, they wanted to cut it more.
Yeah, this
Mhm.
wasn't enough for some of them, and
Yeah.
the other part of this that is, it's about I think philosophy about government, right? Is to
Mhm.
well, there's one side that wants to shrink the government and wants to take care of the wealthy, and there's one side that wants to take care of the people and thinks that government is there to take care of the people.
Yeah.
It's a philosophical difference here, but it is also demonizing people who have no ability to fight back and to lobby because the lobbying comes from the people with money who want the taxes lowered, the corporate tax rates lowered, and think that the government's too big. And it's a terrible position for the poor in America to be in, and that's not
Yeah.
new. So it's
So there we
horrendous.
go. Yeah, the big beautiful bill uh headed to its next destination. And
Yeah.
there was a worry that it could actually lead to Medicare cuts, not Medicaid. That they're cutting that for sure. But there's a worry that it could actually lead to Medicare cuts as well.
Well,
And that's
yeah.
because it increases the debt, right?
It increases the debt,
Yeah.
exactly, and
Mhm.
when the debt goes up, those cuts happen, and the other
Yeah.
part of that is there's incrementalism, right? I mean, look at the way that Republicans and conservatives went after Roe v. Wade, right, and
Mhm.
abortion law. They did it in extreme ways until they were able to they knew if they opened with we want to overturn Roe v. Wade and we want to make abortion illegal, it wasn't going to work. But if you make partial birth abortion which we know doesn't
Yeah.
really happen illegal.
No.
Then you start with that, and then you keep going, then you lower the weeks, and then finally you get to where you need to go. So there is incrementalism on both sides, truthfully, but it seems much more calculated and much more well executed on the right because of the fact that there is a lot of money and there are a lot of conservatives that march in lockstep with one another. And you saw that. I mean, you can say that there were divisions in this. They won by one. The most they could have won by is two. So it was a massive victory because they were able to get everyone, all but one person, to stay in and one person to vote present. And that is marching in lockstep. That is not division. There was division beforehand and people using their pulpits to talk about division, but that's not what you saw in this vote. You did, if there was real division, it wouldn't have passed, and that's a big problem. The budget is it's not what anybody had ever seen before. It is a massive bill. And
would you say there's never been anything like this?
Well, I don't know. Has there been, Albert?
Oh.
Never been anything like this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did you really just do that?
We can laugh, but there's not a lot that's funny for a lot of people in this bill. And let's see, we'll follow it. I'm sure you and Mark and the gang will follow it as well on its way through the Senate and to final passage. And if Mark doesn't come back, it'll be the three of us. So
awesome! I love that.
Yeah,
you're ready to take over and sweep in.
I'm not. I kid. I joke. I'm only here because I want a mug, and I still haven't gotten one.
I know that you're probably not going to be here tomorrow. We have a lot of even fresh content and great conversations to run tomorrow with the first ever best of show on the Mark Thompson show. But you're probably not available tomorrow because you'll be winging your way to DC for tonight's big crypto dinner. I mean, this has to be the case, right? No,
I'll be at the crypto dinner, obviously. Yeah. We'll talk about that crypto dinner. I guess you want to talk about it now. I really do think that we should pay a little attention to the shooting in. We can do that just after.
By all means.
Let's talk about this crypto dinner. It's the 200 some odd winners of the contest to attend that dinner spent nearly $400 million, if I'm not wrong, Kim, on Trump's official cryptocurrency.
Hey, isn't that almost the same price as the Qatar jet?
That's funny, and we officially accepted it as a nation yesterday.
There you go.
So most of these people, though, have remained anonymous, which I think are hysterical, and they're going to have dinner with Trump, and it was the most that anybody paid was like 37 million, but it varied because of how much they bought. His Trump cryptocurrency token was purchased by the more than 200 people that are going to this dinner, and these coin holders, I guess whoever the top ones are, got a seat. And I don't know how they know who the top ones are, but it was done by secret ballot, like it was the electing the Pope. See, I talked about the Pope again today. But they spent nearly $400 million, and the dinner is I think it's tonight. Is that right, or is it tomorrow night? I'm not sure which night it is.
It's tonight, and it's not at the White House. It is at the Trump National Golf Course in Washington, D.C. Right. Not that makes it any better that they're not.
No, because they would never sully the rules governing fundraising in the White House by having these people come to the White House. I mean, that would be against the Constitution. That would be against the law. They would never do anything like that.
Yeah,
right. And not to mention that this is, in fact, a violation of the emoluments clause, and it is the most blatant violation of that I can remember. I mean, I remember being upset in the first Trump administration when the Secret Service were staying at his hotel, right? And the government was footing the bill, and there were increased rates at that hotel in Washington, which is no longer his. But the fact that this is happening, a president putting his name on a currency and getting people to buy it because his name is on it, making money off of the NIL rules are not in effect for presidents, right? That's what this feels like, and it's incredible. And federal employees cannot use their office for financial gain. The president is sort of not part of that as a federal employee.
He's exempt.
But
The
he's
presidency is
exempt.
exempt.
Right. But he is, he's breaking protocol, and the
Right.
White House itself, you cannot do it from the White House. So the president is exempt from doing it, but not at the White House, which I'm sure has something to do with why they're having it at another site, but there are also security reasons for that too. So it's incredible. Let's go through some of these winners. They spent far more than the legal limit for an American to donate directly to a political candidate, which is $3,500. The top spender revealed himself Tuesday as Justin Sun, who's a Chinese-born crypto entrepreneur who told Forbes in March that he'd become a citizen of the tiny island nation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Sun was sued by the SEC, but that case has been paused under the Trump administration. You're kidding. They paused that case. The other identities are unknown because they use pseudonyms and their cryptocurrency wallet doesn't show their real name. But in order, they had to look through each wallet, and of the 220 wallets tied to contest winners, 158 of them, or 72%, appear foreign. So again, that's foreign influence in American politics. Is the most sullying event I can think of for all the offenses that you have seen of campaign finance law. I can't imagine anything that was more blatant than this.
This is pretty bad. Yeah, it really is. And of course, Trump is saying this isn't for me. This isn't, the money isn't going to go to me.
Right.
What's interesting, I thought, was not only
it'll go to my kids.
It's right. It'll go to my kids. It'll go to the business. Not only do they make money off the sales of crypto, what they did is they took a specific moment in time and they froze it, and they looked at who were the biggest investors in the Trump crypto. They call it $Trump, whatever it is. But he not only makes money off of that, he makes money every time there's a trade or transaction as well. So all of this turnover and people buying and selling it, he makes a cut of that as well. Very fascinating.
Yeah.
How this whole crypto thing works. I don't know. So here's some more information about the people that won this big Trumpy Trump contest. The top 7 winners each spent more than $10 million. The bottom 24 spent less than $100,000. A third of the winners, 67 of these 220 people, spent more than $1 million. So the average winner for tonight's dinner spent $1.788 million, 1.7 mil, to attend a dinner to get some FaceTime with the president. Why do you think they did that? Why do you think they wanted to be in his orbit?
I think, there are no innocent reasons for it. I mean, the most innocent reason could be to be able to talk about it and to own a little bit of something that has the Trump name on it. But the most skeptical reason is obviously to curry favor with Trump and the United States. These are all apparently wealthy people who are investing, and they want influence. If so many of them are from out of the country, they want influence with the president of the United States, and they're going to be in front of him, and he's going to say beautiful things about them tonight. and that's that. And it's more than just that. He knows where he's going to go when he needs help with anything, and that's to the people that have the money. And even if they're prevented because of campaign finance laws in this country from giving, he is finding a way around it to get their influence, even if they're not writing checks to the Republican National Committee.
What I thought was interesting as well is that many of these winners are from other countries, Singapore, Australia, and it's illegal, mostly, for people who are not US citizens to donate to American political candidates, but they get around it because most of the money is going to these Trump affiliated companies, and I guess not directly to Trump or his political campaign. So I guess that's why foreign nationals can give Trump money now.
Yeah, and they're giving him money indirectly, right? I mean, they're not giving it to a campaign, they're not giving it to a PAC, but they're giving it to Trump in this way. And even if he is somehow has an arm's distance from that business, which they do, they generally step away. Presidents do from the day-to-day of their finances. He has his sons that are right on it and taking care of it. And to me, that is the I think the one part of this that is the scariest is that this goes to his family, and then the perpetuation, as we talked about, of their involvement in politics, and they're having this money to influence politics. As you see Elon Musk fade into the wilderness, you see all this money coming into the Trump family. It's a horrendous political thing. And
just to tie that up, there were 220 crypto wallets that were selected as the winners of this dinner. And NBC News had an analyst look at those wallets, and 158 of them, or 72%, appeared to be foreign.
Yeah.
So that stands out to me as a big concern. Who's paying?
Yeah,
Why
that's what we're talking about.
What are they doing? What do they want? Yeah. That's it.
And even if every single one of them had no agenda, which we know isn't true, but even if that were the case, it still sets up a look that our laws try and avoid. And it's going to be, it's unprecedented, and will this precedent continue? Not without the Trump name and the Trump backing. So, that is one of the 1,000 reasons to be optimistic about post-Trump America. But for now, and what happens between now and then, it's a long time. Happens between now and then is frightening, because of stuff like this. And it's not just this. So,
well, I know you wanted to talk about this horrible shooting that happened right outside of the Washington, D.C. Jewish Museum.
Yeah, it's the two young workers at the Washington embassy, Israeli embassy, were leaving an event last night and were killed by a man we now know is named as Elias Rodriguez, who comes from Chicago. And the two people who were there were in their 20s. I mean, there were many people there. The two people, though, who were killed, one of their names is let me get to this name here, because it's Yaron Lashinsky, who is a Christian from Israel, and Sarah Milgram. They were both Israeli embassy employees, and they were murdered outside the Capitol Jewish Museum there, not outside the embassy. So the Lachinsky had a master's degree in government diplomacy and strategy, and Sarah Sarah Milgram was someone who was working in Washington, and they were about to go to Israel. She was going to meet his family. His mother's a Christian. He was raised as a Christian in Israel, but he's a devout supporter of Israel, and of course they're at the embassy working there. There's of course the usual things happen here, which is that the far right in Israel is saying that there is too much anti-Semitism being sown. They're going as far as to blame the leadership in France and England and Canada for this, for supporting a free Palestine. They're saying the Free Palestinian movement is a license to kill Jews. And then on the other side, the opposition is saying that this is happening because of the fact of what we are doing in Gaza. Yair Lapid, who is the opposition leader there in Israel, saying that it's because we are killing people in Gaza that this is happening. And you don't want to see this happen to two innocent people, whether they're
No.
Israeli or Palestinian, and this is an ugly way to have this happen. The blame is going to be cast on both sides, but clearly the world, if you look at Western Europe, you look at Canada, you look at a lot of movement here in the United States, is leaning toward it being too much now. If they weren't already there, what Israel's posture has been since October 7th has incited a lot of this as well in retaliation. But again, you don't kill two innocent people to make your point, just like you don't want innocent people killed in Gaza, if that is your point. And so it's going to play out. These sorts of arguments are playing out in Israel right now with the opposition leader, like I said, Lapid, up against Netanyahu, saying that they're killing babies for hobby in Gaza. Well, the right wing in Israel is up in arms about that, and Lapid saying that this is what we are reaping now, what we have sown for a while, and it's obviously a very, very difficult conversation for anyone to have, but this is what's happening now. For his part, the most hard line in Israel's history, government in Israel's history, is they've said that the leftists are to blame because they're posing, they are supporting opponents to Israel and creating this anti-Semitism. And Golan, who is, one of the, I guess Golan is one of the opposition members in Israel, has said that we are that this is blood libel that is costing us in blood, and that these fights are happening is horrendous. And it's causing these kind of problems. Anyway, we'll see what we know more about Elias Rodriguez, but he seems a bit like a lone wolf. The FBI and authorities are in his apartment in Chicago as we speak, looking into what brought him to Washington to do this. But it seems pretty clear he had a Palestinian flag in his window, and he was part of the Free Palestine movement.
There's some video of him yelling "Free Palestine" right after the shooting. So I think it seems to be a political motive in nature, but I was reading that this young couple was due to be engaged within a week. It's just really sad. They have these great jobs. They get to come to America, work for the Israeli embassy or, at the Israeli embassy, starting their lives together, and for mowed down like that, shot down for what?
Yeah.
And this in America, you think of that political violence happening in other parts of the world, but it seems like we are now becoming a place where political violence happens as well. And I can only think it's because of our political climate in this country that it's seeping over. What happens in other countries is seeping in.
Yeah, it's certainly, there is something to be said for that. But it is also people here making a stand, people seeing what's happening in Gaza, but also being, so ignorant as to think that just killing a young couple leaving an event in DC is going to, change Israel and make Israel and their government change what they're doing in Gaza. It has to change in different ways, and that's what people want to see happen. So it's just horrendously tragic, and the eye for eye and eye stuff is exactly why people are angry, because of Israel, the way that people think Israel overreacted to October 7th and went in and have remained there in disproportionate ways. Well, this also doesn't solve that problem in this guy's estimation. So it's a terrible, terrible thing. And, and it's scary as well. Barry, thank you for giving $4.99 and for support of the show. We really appreciate it. Everything,
Barry, thank you.
That this audience does and this community does to keep this show going and to keep really smart people from gathering every day for 2 hours here is pretty great. So that comment section is full of really impressive, 99.9% really impressive stuff. And only because I don't have an account in there, and I've never commented, but I don't know how you do that. So
Oh, well, I'll have to teach you. Yeah.
another
Then you'll,
guy, but no, but I think we just leave it as it is because
okay.
it's a lot easier. But in any case, I feel in the community when I do the show.
There you go.
Which is really nice. So Kim, we have an interview that Mark did. We want to have a little bit of Mark before we head into the Memorial Day weekend and leading into David Katz. I think we can play this video. This is an interview that he did with Laura Munson, a writer. Mark likes to get people reading. And remember, when you buy your books, if you're interested in what Laura Munson had to say, you buy those books from bookshop.org. It goes to independent bookstores. It gets to you in a couple of days. And just like that, let's listen to Laura Munson and Mark Thompson.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Who's Mark Thompson?
Feels good.
When they raided Mar-a-Lago, God didn't like that.
Oh, yeah, everybody. Oh, yeah. I've got an honest-to-goodness author in the mix today. Maybe just the tonic we need during these times. Politics dominates things. Crises dominate conversations. Maybe Laura Munson's book is a good little diversion off of that main street. She is here now, Laura Munson. Her new book is The Wild Why, and it answers so many questions. It's kind of a personal story, but it also diverts. Oh, you're a very good author, holding up the book there. Very, very well done.
Hi, Mark. Thanks
hello.
For
I'm so excited to talk to you. It's, as I say, it's a bit of a diversion from some of the politics and some of the grim stuff that we get into on this show regularly. And there is real stuff in real life in your book.
It is. It's called The Wild Why. And then the subtitle sets up what's in the book: Stories and Teachings to Uncover Your Wonder. Stories and teachings. Because I think in this hustle culture, we're getting pretty sick of tips and tricks and 10 easy steps. I have found that those don't really stick. And what really does stick is telling our stories. And so this book encourages the reader to do a lot of things. We'll talk about wonder in a minute, but part of it, to me, when we're speaking about relief from our culture and all that's going on in the world, to me, it's so important to take a moment to really connect with each other, because we need to empathize with each other, especially in what I'm calling this worried world. We need to connect. And how do we connect? In my opinion, it's through story. We live our life in stories.
Well, we certainly, as a species, right, have created a kind of a DNA based on stories, I'd suggest, right, from the very earliest germination of societies. You've had stories, right? So I think it's a great way to start. But what kicks off those stories? How do you apply sort of that to your life and to, our lives and our interconnectivity?
Well, so I'm not just a writer. I'm also a teacher, a writing teacher, and I lead writing retreats out here in Montana, where I've lived for 30 years. And I also do speeches and stuff like that. So writers are students of the human being. I'm sure you would say that you are too in your role. And so what I hear the most from people out on the road or on my retreats or one-on-one are these three things. And this has to do with self-expression. And that's what you're asking about: story, self-expression, our relationship with self-expression. And the three things I hear the most are: I don't have a voice, I'm not creative, and the other one is I'm stuck when it comes to self-expression. And I was wandering around in the woods one day in Montana, as I tend to do, and I was thinking that word creativity and that phrase, find my voice, can feel like bullies inside of our minds. And they usually go way back to early childhood wounding when it comes to self-expression. And so I thought, well, of course people have a voice. They're using it to say, I don't have a voice. And of course we're creative. You know this, every single thought we think, every gesture, everything we do is an act of creation. And I'm stuck. Well, I think that's something that somebody told us so that we could remain so, because the kid in us, the kid isn't walking around saying, I don't have a voice, I'm not creative, and I'm stuck. So I thought, what is behind creativity that's for everyone, not just people who want to write or not just public speakers, but what is behind creativity? And I thought wonder. And then I thought wonder is a big word too. What's behind wonder? And that's when I got into curiosity and awe. And I want to talk about those two things because to me, that's the salve that we need right now.
So spend a heartbeat on those two things then, if you would.
Okay. So curiosity. I think that we live in a culture that is very heavy on curiosity. You know, we have Google and different search engines that have grown from our curiosity. However, what I think we're missing is the awe piece. And that's something that children know well. Even people, even children that have endured great abuse, they still have some connection with that awe. And so a really simple example of this is if you look at a rainbow, you know, we might almost immediately, knowing that it's a fleeting thing, maybe just 3 minutes, we might immediately think, what makes a rainbow? And now we're looking at our screens. Instead of looking at the rainbow, what if we actually stopped and beheld the rainbow and then looked at our screens? So I think we've got it a little flip-flopped. And this is not a silly, frilly idea. I can't say that enough. It's like, to me, our civilization depends on this connection with awe, and that requires stopping. That requires tapping into that which made us curious enough to want to be in awe of something, which is often something that hatches in our mind or something that we see in the world. And if we immediately go to Google, and I use Google all the time, but if we immediately go to our screens, then how are we connecting with ourselves? And therefore, in not connecting with ourselves, how are we departing from our self-connection? And this, to me, is why we end up hearing things from people. I'm not creative, I don't have a voice, and I'm stuck. And this book, I wrote this book so that we can get over those personal myths and back to our self-connection and connection with others and our world. There's a lot to love about our world, even though it is a very worried one right now.
So the Wild Why is designed to take us through this journey, but we do it through you, do we not? I mean, isn't there a lot of, there's a big connection to you in this story?
Yes. And so as with many things I've done in my life, it's kind of a hybrid. So it's, I've written a New York Times bestselling, straight up 100% memoir. This is not the story you think it is. And then I wrote a novel, it's a complete novel called Willa's Grove. That was a USA Today bestseller. Then I decided to write this book, which is in between the lane of self-help and memoir. Again, because I believe that we learn from story, personal story. So if I say, here's my point, which might land in a self-help book, now I'm going to go first. I'll expose myself. I'll hold the torch. I'll write past the fear of exposure, which is what stops a lot of us from self-expressing authentically. It's what has a lot of us say, oh, I'm fine. You know, when we're buying broccoli in the grocery store, when really we're bashed and bloody inside, or has us say, enough about me, how about you? You know, so I thought, well, why don't I model, since I'm a storyteller by profession, why don't I model it by exposing some stories of my own that have to do with where that wonder lived and where it was challenged. I don't believe it can be killed, but I think it can get pretty flattened. And then where it was refound. So the subtitle, to uncover stories and teachings to uncover your wonder, it's a return to something. It's an uncovering. It's not a new learning. It's simply about remembering what you knew as a child. And it's time to get back to it.
So give me an example of one of these things from your life.
Okay. Well, this is not in the book, but I think it's a good little thing to plant in your mind, and then I'll see if my mind can come up with one of the stories that I want to share right now. But if you think about playground politics, if you think about the sandbox, those kids are sitting in the sandbox. They're often strangers to one another. And I really ask people to stop and watch kids, because they're not in competition when they're really little. They're just in awe. It's just like, ooh, look at that shiny shovel. Oh, here's my bucket. Can I borrow your shovel? Like, oh, look at that castle. Hey, let's create moats. And then they can connect, and we'll fill them with water and see if our dragons can play together. Like, remember that? That's what I want us to get back to. So what I tried to do just then was activate your imagination to get you into what I would call a little teeny scene snippet. But in this book throughout, there are stretched stories that I then push the pause button on to do some teaching. And then I go back to sharing the stories. One that comes to mind has to do with me walking around in the woods in Montana. And a friend of mine said, Laura, I was ranting on and on and on about how I think our culture has lost its wonder. I've been writing this book for 9 years. So I've been studying this in people for 9 years on top of writing other books at the same time. But this one had my attention. And so I said, I just feel like everybody says awesome, but it's without really meaning that it's awesome or wonderful, without it being truly wonder-centric. And so I was going on and on and on with this guy, and he's a total mountain man. And he said, Laura, with his eyes dancing, do you think you could make a 60-second fire do you think you could make a fire in 60 seconds that would last for 60 seconds? And I said, oh, I'm sure I can. I absolutely can. I've lived in Montana. I live off of wood-burning heat for a lot of the winter. And he said, okay, go. And so I scurried around and I grabbed a bunch of things, like fallen birch bark and dried grass. And he said, oh, and P.S., one match. That's it. You've got only one match. And I was so sure. And what happened was that ambition took me over. And in my mind, instead of thinking about the 60-second fire, I was thinking of a huge bonfire, that would like save a village. And so I came back after 60 seconds. I had my little fire structure all built. He brought the match over, and it went one needle, flared up, and then wilted and flared down. And then I said, let's see yours. And he was just sitting on a stump. He hadn't even moved. And he just picked one little piece of sap out. Now, I don't encourage people to start fires in the woods, obviously, but this was in a very controlled situation in my backyard. And he had just some grass on the ground, and he took a teeny little piece of sap and he lit it, and it burned. And it burned for a whole lot longer than 60 seconds. So what do you think the lesson is in this? How do we get in our own way when it comes to truly being in awe, in wonder? Well, I was certainly in mine, because all I wanted was a big, huge fire to prove myself somehow, or to be good at something, when all I needed was just to look at what was right around me. And I knew that sap makes a fire, but I didn't even think about that. And so the lesson in that is, and he loved giving it to me. It was only a 60-second fire, Laura. It wasn't meant to be a bonfire. And I think that a kid would have understood. I think that the little version of me would have paid attention.
It's
and
interesting.
Grown-up version needed to be good at it.
You're saying the adult in you squeezed out the simplicity that would have come with looking at that task as a kid.
Totally. I think that that's a great example. And part of why I've lived here for so long, and I originally hail from Chicago, and I've lived in Boston and San Francisco and New York and London and lots of places, Seattle. But I've stayed here for 3 decades because it serves up a whopping dose of wonder all the time. And to that end, if you're out there listening to this, and you live in a city, listen, wonder is available everywhere we look. When people come to Montana and they say, I just love who I am when I'm out here in nature. I don't know how I'll be when I go back home. I try to impress upon them that we are nature. You can be nature in a Midtown Manhattan elevator. You can be nature anywhere. Of course, it's different than walking around in the woods. But we have that available to us everywhere we go. We just have to start practicing a different way of mental programming and get in touch with how our thought patterns serve us and sabotage us in the way of our self-expression.
That's just such good advice, and it just lands so cleanly. We all know how we sabotage ourselves. I mean, we all know that we sabotage ourselves. We don't always know how we sabotage ourselves, but sometimes we know how we sabotage ourselves as well. You are leaving Montana to go on a book tour. Tell everybody where you're going to be.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to be all over the place. I'm going actually to a lot of those cities where I've lived because I've got friends there and I've got over 1,000 alums of my Haven writing programs. So
is there a website that
yes.
kind of tracks where you'll be? What is that?
Sure, lauramunson.com, and you can go to the events page. But I'm going to be in New York City. I'm going to be in Connecticut, New Jersey. Then I'm going up to Boston. Then I'm going to be in Chicago, all over the suburbs, and then in the city. San Francisco, doing 3 gigs in San Francisco, up to Seattle. And then I'll be doing a bunch of stuff in Texas, where I have never been in my life. I am going to do 3 events.
Oh, wow.
I know. I'm pretty excited about that.
lauramunson.com. We have viewers and listeners in all those places, so I hope they'll come out and say hi to you. And do you read from the text, or is it more just kind of meet and greet? How does it work?
Thanks for asking. I'm going to be reading, and then I'll be in conversation in most of those events, which are usually held at independent bookstores. Support your independent bookstores, please, everybody. I'll be in conversation with a local person, like in Portland. I'll be at Powell's with Sheila Hamilton, who's a 5-time Grammy-winning journalist. I'll be with Naomi Shihab Nye, the incredible...
She's not a Grammy-winning journalist.
Emmy, I'm so sorry.
Right, okay. I just want you to know I'm paying attention to what you say. Go ahead.
Yeah, I said Grammy is because I'm going to hear some great music in New York City in a few days. No, Emmy. Sheila Hamilton. And I'll be with Naomi Shihab Nye, who's an incredible poet. She teaches down in San Antonio, and lots of people along the way.
That's terrific. Is it fun to do a book tour, or are you kind of like, is it daunting?
It's a little bit of both. Thank goodness I was a theater major before I figured out that I was a writer. Most writers are introverts. So I happen to be really energized by people. And, that's part of why I wrote this book, because I could have done the whole thing as a memoir, but I really come from a place of service. And so at the end of each chapter, there's a section called Your Wild Why, and it gives you some sort of writing prompt or living prompt. This book is not for writers. It's for anybody and who really wants to get their finger on the pulse of what they want to say, have to say. And that begins in your own mind. And the writer, David James Duncan, who's one of my mentors, he said, this is a workbook for the soul. And so there is wow, the encouragement at the end of each chapter to somehow bring the teachings and stories into your lives so that things shift for you in the way of your self-expression and how to feel free in it and hopefully how to feel wonderful in it.
Oh, it's just terrific. The Wild Why, stories and teachings to uncover your wonder. Laura Munson, lauramunson.com. We'll have a link to the book, and we'll have a link to lauramunson.com so that people can follow your schedule if they are headed out to maybe meet you and get a signed copy.
Yeah, come say hi. We're going to have a great time. I'm actually really excited to be holding this torch of light across this country because we need it. We do indeed.
We do indeed, Laura. Might be, really what we need in this moment. Thanks for being with us today, and good luck on everything.
Thanks,
Laura
Mark.
Munson. Yep.
The Mark Thompson Show.
And we're back.
And we're back. Yeah. And thanks to correspondent Mark Thompson for doing a bang-up job. I feel like I today am holding a torch of light for the country by sitting in Mark's chair here, not literally, but doing the show. I'm Michael Shure along with Kim and Albert today. We have another hour in my tenure this week. Tomorrow, as you said, Kim, we're going to do some best of, some new interviews, and then Monday, everybody can take a little day off. We are dark here. And then on Tuesday, you guys get him back. Mark Thompson, tanned, what was it? Tanned, rested, and ready. That's what they said about Richard Nixon. So
there you
Mark
go.
Thompson will be tanned, rested and ready. In a little bit, we'll be talking to our friend David Katz. It's what's nice about doing the show and coming in and subbing for Mark is all the interesting people I get to talk to who I wouldn't otherwise. And David Katz is among the best. And so that's when you say among the best, there really are only 4 or 5. So everybody's among the best. But I will concede that I particularly enjoy my visits with David when I'm here. We've talked about the big, beautiful bill. We've talked about the Bitcoin or the Trump coin dinner that is happening tonight. And let's do one weird story, Kim, before David is here. And when he gets here, we'll go right into all of our legal curiosities that are happening in the news. And then there's also my dog, but he'll
welcome
from time to time. Welcome. So the 700% APR lending business tied to Dr. Phil's son is dividing an Alaska tribe. I mean, that seems to be the kind of story that one would say. No, exactly. Thank you, Albert. I hemmed and hawed so that you would come in with a what. So a tribal lending business in Minto, Alaska is bringing in much needed revenue, but also dividing the community over ethical concerns and questions about who benefits. 2 suits allege Minto's partners received the bulk of the lending revenue. Among those named, Jay McGraw, son of Dr. Phil, who is linked to a firm assisting the tribe. Minto's lending operations have been the subject of numerous consumer complaints, with borrowers frustrated by interest rates far higher than most states allow. So Jay McGraw is a TV producer.
Who apparently is fleecing the natives in Alaska.
Right.
Wow.
Who became involved. And this is always the thing. Whenever you hear somebody who fits this bill, look at them askance, became involved in the payday lending industry over a decade ago and has been affiliated with a range of financial services businesses. Now, I'm sure there are good people in the payday lending business, but as a business, it is a fleecing business. It is one that takes advantage of people left and right. Yes, they help out and they provide a service, but you are a wolf in sheep's clothing, because then you get that money down the road and you charge a ton of money to help those people who are in an emergent situation.
Yeah, they're desperate.
Yeah.
They're desperate. These are people are in desperate times who would agree to this type of interest rate because they're desperate for the money, and he's coming in and taking advantage of that. That's not cool.
One of these people complained to the Better Business Bureau. Minto Money holds an F rating with the Better Business Bureau. An F rating. Do you know how hard it is? Customers who took out loans.
That's real.
Customers took out loans which ranged from $200 to $5,000 to $3,000. Pleaded for relief from onerous terms that allowed Minto Money to claw back the sums multiple times over through automatic batik withdrawals, right? Is that what they're called? Bank withdrawals. I don't know why it says batik. This loan is outrageous, with interest over 700%. One person complained to the Better Business Bureau about having paid $4,167 on a $1,200 loan from Minto Money. I am one step away from filing for bankruptcy, they wrote to the Better Business Bureau. A federal suit filed in Illinois in November by 5 Minto Money borrowers contends that McGraw has provided tens of millions of dollars in capital for the loans. CreditServe provides the infrastructure to market, underwrite, and collect on them, while the tribe is merely a front and shares in only a small percentage of the revenue go to them, according to the suit. It called McGraw the enterprise's principal beneficiary, asserting that he and CreditServe CEO Eric Welch have collected hundreds of millions of dollars of payments made by consumers.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So isn't Dr. Phil the new czar of the Protect Christianity Task Force, the religious whatever task force? Aren't these supposed to be godly people, not taking advantage of the desperate and the poor?
Right, the poor and downtrodden. But if we can make a few bucks off of them, I mean, it's consistent. It's consistent with the bill that passed today, right? In some ways, right? It's just taking advantage of people who can be taken advantage of because of their situation in life right now, and it's the Lori Baker, who's chief of the Minto tribal government, like all of the lawyers, said in an email that the Minto Village Council had no comment in response to questions about the lending operations. So it goes to local government. Among critics of Minto's lending operation, the idea that outsiders can't be trusted is central to their opposition. One Minto elder who no longer lives in the community worries that strangers are taking advantage of the tribe and its loan customers alike. The elder asked not to be named because of concerns about reprisals for criticizing the lucrative business. They are exploiting our village, the elder said. It is not right taking from poor people to get yourself rich, which is basically what we are saying. So Minto, Alaska is probably making a couple of bucks off of it, but it's coming from their people, their villagers who need these loans. And it is going all the way to the pockets of Jay McGraw, allegedly, who is Dr. Phil's son. And this case would not be getting the attention it is getting even by our sitting here and talking about it, were it not for the fact that Jay McGraw is related to Dr. Phil. So in a sense, the tribe and the people who are opposed to this and angry about it and feel fleeced by it are the ones who are doing it. They're getting that extra attention because it's Dr. Phil's son. So sometimes celebrity works in interesting ways.
Yeah, and thanks to ProPublica for great reporting on that story.
Thanks to ProPublica every day. Yeah,
exactly.
Great reporting on that story, indeed, Kim. And then we have
our guy. Our guy has arrived.
Oh, he has arrived. Old friend David Katz is here. Look at that. Without going into another story, because we have plenty to talk about with him, let's give a good Mark Thompson show, even though it's not his show today. Let's give a round of applause to our next guest, your friend, and now my friend, David Katz. How are you?
Hi, great to be with you.
Great to be with you too, David. We got a lot to talk about, kid. There's so much happening out there, isn't there?
There sure is.
Let's so the first thing that people, we talked about this big beautiful bill earlier in the show, and I don't know if this was part of your docket today, and I'm not saying that you're going to be able to answer this question, but I am curious if you can, because you can come up with an answer better than I can. There is a provision in this bill that passed where it is making it so that courts cannot hold the president or administration in contempt. I am blindsiding you with this. I'm not letting you have the advantage of reading into it first. In general, though, if a bill in Congress says that, what is your gut on whether or not that can be enforced later on? They're saying that these contempt charges against Trump and in lower courts and higher courts of not, that the administration is allowed to basically defy the courts.
Well, I think it's out of Congress's bailiwick. I think it's part of the separation of powers that the courts have that power. The courts had that power back in Great Britain. Even before we had the revolution and a constitution. And there's two kinds of civil contempts, Mike. One is a civil contempt. And I can't believe that the Congress or the president or them signing a bill could change that. So if court tells you to do something and you refuse to do it, you willfully fail to do it, the court can punish you by making you do it. Now, that's not considered a criminal contempt. Maybe punish is the wrong word. But until you comply with the order, you can be placed in custody. And so if you won't give them, let's say, the number to a Swiss bank account, and you've been ordered to give that number for the Swiss bank account by the court as part of discovery, as part of the litigation, and you say, I refuse. They say, well, until you turn over that number, you're going to sit in jail. And then you have the keys to the jailhouse door in your hand because you can comply. I can't believe they can touch civil contempt. I suppose they could abolish criminal contempt from the criminal code, and then there would be no statute in federal court that would be one for criminal contempt. But I just don't imagine that the law goes that far, because a lot of those criminal contempts could be seen as an obstruction of justice. They could be seen as an obstruction of judicial administration. And so they'd have to basically bar all of those bills. They'd have to basically abrogate them from the federal criminal code so that there wouldn't be violations for criminal contempt in court, obstruction of justice if it occurred in a court, something like that if it occurred in a court proceeding. So I think where the rubber hits the road is on one of those flights. So now they're told that you can't put people either on a flight at all until there's been a further judicial determination, and some officer in Trump's administration puts them on a flight anyway, notwithstanding the court order. Or they're said, as happened with the people who were just sent to South Sudan, they say you can only be sent to one of those countries once you're legally deported, but you can only be deported to one of these 3 countries, let's say. Guess what? South Sudan is not on that list.
Right.
In 2 hours, we're not going back to your country of origin, and we're not sending you to country X or Y. You're going to South Sudan, and you have 2 hours. You can't get to court. You can't get a lawyer. You can't have any kind of process. And next thing you know, the flight takes off for South Sudan. The idea would be that you couldn't be held in contempt by the judge for that either. So I think, number one, this probably isn't going to work at all. And number two, I don't see the Senate, both sides, both houses of Congress have to agree. And I don't see that there are 4 Republican senators who wouldn't ditch that. I mean, we've had that for hundreds of years. It's such a it flies so in the face of what federal judges have been able to do. Judges can do that in state court. So I think it's a nothing burger.
All right. Well, that's good to know, because we are looking at these hungry people at the Mark Thompson Show are looking for nothing burgers in this bill, and to have one of those is great. I'll give myself a little bit of credit for saying I don't think it would make it through the Senate, but I don't know what they can do with it. David Katz, because he knows everything, says that in essence, I'm a little bit right about that. So I'll take that as a pat on the back from David. And now let's talk about a big story that is coming, that came out of the Supreme Court today. It's an unusual Supreme Court story. We don't often get 4-4 ties because it's a 9-judge justice panel. But Amy Coney Barrett recused herself from this case. It's a case that the Supreme Court, in a 4-4 tie, means it goes to whatever the previous ruling was at the lower court, and it ends Oklahoma's bid to have a taxpayer-funded Catholic charter school. Tell me why this is important and how it got to that.
Well, it's very important to me personally because I'm getting into Pete Rose consecutive hits territory because I predicted this one.
And now, by the way, David, that means you're also eligible for the Hall of Fame because you've been stripped of your ban, which is great.
And I don't bet on law. I did a couple of
That's the best line ever. I don't bet on law. All right, go ahead.
I did a couple of contingency cases and I won a couple of them. And let me tell you, that's too rich even for my blood. And I came out winning. My friend said, you come out losing one of these days. You'll really not like contingency fee litigation. So yeah, I don't bet on baseball and I don't bet on law.
Okay.
But it's a fascinating case. And if I can get a little bit inside the it's establishment clause, but it's a fascinating case. And the reason that I guessed it right was I thought from his questioning that Roberts would go with the 3 liberals. And given the fact that Amy Coney Barrett recused herself, she doesn't have to state a reason, but she did recuse herself. And people have speculated that because of her connection with Notre Dame Law School, where she taught before she went on the circuit court and before she then went on the U.S. Supreme Court, but because of her affiliation with Notre Dame Law, and I think Notre Dame Law or one of its projects had been the attorneys for the religious schools that want to be charter schools. And I had
in particular, a very close friend of hers was on one of those in part of one of those groups from Notre Dame Law, someone who she's best friends with, which is why she.
And that's part of her whole affiliation, and she really did the right thing. And in trying to make my prediction, she did the right thing in recusing herself. You wish that Alito and Thomas would, they're right around people who are rightly recusing themselves. Why don't they rightly recuse themselves from some of those cases that they made the Supreme Court look so corrupt and tawdry, Alito and Thomas, by not following the rules, whether they're imposed by Congress or they're imposed by a judicial ethics panel that has teeth because they're the U.S. Supreme Court. every right-thinking lawyer and judge knows that those two justices should have recused themselves from the cases that we've discussed. So she did the right thing ethically. She recused herself. That left it 4-4. And the reason I made the prediction was that I thought Justice Roberts would not have liked the headline. We don't have that many tabloids anymore. But the obvious headline was, all Catholic judges rule everyone in America has to pay for Catholic schools. It had that look of 4 Catholic justices, or 5. It would have been 5 if he'd have joined the other side.
Yeah.
5 all Catholic justices make taxpayers of America pay for their Catholic schools. And Roberts had the good sense not to go down that road, because that's what the case looked like. And it would have looked like they were establishing the Catholic religion in Catholic schools at taxpayer expense. And when people say, well, are they discriminating against religion? Are they infringing on the free exercise of religion? No, they're not. Because of our separation of powers, the Catholic Church doesn't have to pay in. They don't have to pay taxes on all those wonderful, until the acolytes came along, they used to make a profit. But all the money that the Catholic Church makes, all the real estate that they own and don't have to pay normal real estate taxes, all of the things where they have advantages because of the separation of church and state, to take all of those advantages fiscally and then to turn around and make all of us taxpayers pay for their Catholic schools. And this goes not just to Catholic schools. This would really hit a lot of people who probably don't care about it at all, or think, wow, they're being unfair to the Catholic schools. My friend goes to Catholic school, really likes it, thinks it's great. This would also apply to madrasas, the Islamic schools. So we who are not Muslims would be paying for their madrasas. We who are not Catholics would be paying for Catholic schools. People who are not Jewish would be paying for some of these yeshivas. And in one of the cases that came out, they were talking about the yeshivas and how they don't even have instruction, many of them, in English. Some of their students end up leaving those schools not even speaking English well. They have instruction in Hebrew. They read the Talmud. That's all wonderful. You can have that religion and you can practice it that way. But again, why are we taxpayers paying for it? So the ins and outs of this case are, it comes from Oklahoma. And you might think, oh my goodness. But they understand, the justices on the Oklahoma State Supreme Court, they understand our Constitution, and they understand Oklahoma's Constitution, and they understand that both of them have this separation of church and state. So when the charter schools come in, Mike, and there's over 4 million kids who are in charter schools are public schools, and that's where people have trouble understanding this case. But charter schools are just like public schools. That's why they get public funds. Now, they can emphasize math and science. They can have maybe higher disciplinary standards. So parents may want their kids to go to that charter school. But their curriculum is set forth and approved by the state. And if they were teaching the Catholic religion, if they were having catechism, if they were teaching the Quran and Muslim religion as a religious thing, not as a part of history, but as a religious thing, their curriculum would not be approved. They would not be approved as charter schools. So the next leap is, well, since you guys are making the taxpayers pay for charter schools, why shouldn't you make the taxpayers also pay for religious schools? And the Oklahoma Supreme Court said, by a large majority, like 6-2, the Oklahoma Supreme Court said that would violate the separation of church and state. It would establish a religion with public funds in Oklahoma, and that would violate both the U.S. Supreme Court Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and it would violate the Oklahoma Constitution. Since the Attorney General, and think what guts this guy has. He's the Republican Attorney General of Oklahoma, but he took this position because it's right under the Constitution. I doubt it's politically expedient for him. He'll probably be primaried.
Right.
But he took that position. And so because there's a federal question, does it or does it not violate the federal Constitution, that the U.S. Supreme Court could take it? It wasn't was just a finding under the Oklahoma State Constitution. It was also a finding under the federal Constitution. So it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, but because it's a win, the tie goes to the winner below. And so the fact that you could not fund schools if they were religious with public funds, that having been the winning decision below, having been the ruling of the Oklahoma Supreme Court, the tie goes to affirming it. So that is still the law. So this religious school, this Catholic school in Oklahoma, has never gotten off the ground because of all of the litigation. But since it's a 4-4 tie, we say it doesn't have precedential value. It merely decided this case and avoided, in my opinion, a terrible ruling in this case had Roberts made it 5-3. If Roberts had made it 5-3, you don't like where your taxes are going right now. A lot of people out there listening, you don't like where they're going right now. They'd be going to pay for overtly Catholic catechism, Catholic schools, your nickel paying for that education. Now, the Supreme Court, last thing, has said that there are certain improvements at parochial Catholic religious schools, yeshivas, Islamic madrasas, that the state has to pay for. If the local schools are getting a new parking lot and they need a new parking lot because there's no room to park, yes, they can spend your tax dollars on building a parking lot at the madrasa or the Catholic school. And they can boost the tuition somewhat. And they can maybe pay for certain kinds of secular textbooks. So it's one of those. It's a good, it's a good bar question because it has a lot of intricacies. But this was too far. This was too far for Roberts. Roberts went with the other three, and I expect that there'll be some other state where they'll win, and that case will go to the Supreme Court. If that case tied, it would affirm that the taxpayers have to pay for the Catholic school in that state. So this is definitely wait to see what happens in the future, but just a fascinating case, and Katz got it right.
Cat's got it right. Yeah, I've got my Cat's got it right T-shirt. It's in the laundry, but he did get it right again. Let me ask you this, David. Some of you just said because one thing I was going to say is I don't know if it was the Oklahoma Supreme Court or the Maine Supreme Court on a case that was similar, kind of a cousin to this case. They also talked about how the more money goes into schools like charter schools, and if they were religious schools, the less money that would go into public schools. And it really would be a disservice to everyone who attends these public schools that are not religious schools. It would lead to, I'm paraphrasing here, the further deterioration of public schools. Does that come into play in legal realm, or is that more in a political and sort of narrative realm?
I think that's more of a policy argument because the charter schools are here to stay. More than 4 million people are in charter schools. They're opting out of the normal public school system, but because the curriculum and the other aspects of the charter schools are approved, they're deemed okay. And all of them are secular. None of them have this overt religious instruction. But the charter schools, as I say, they may emphasize STEM, more science and math. They may have higher disciplinary standards. People really worry that the kids who need special education don't have the same access to those charter schools. And so the normal schools have to deal with, the more time consuming, difficult students. And meanwhile, the charter schools get a holiday from them. And when they say that they're higher at this and they're higher than that, it's sort of self-selecting at some of those charter schools. But charter schools are here to stay. And if the Supreme Court ever says that the taxpayers have to pay for Catholic schools, overtly religious schools, there's going to be a huge backlash against charter schools, and people without kids, people who kind of hold their nose and tolerate the taxes that they pay right now for schools without having kids themselves, are going to say, wait a second. Now I'm not only paying for these charter schools that seem to have all these advantages and none of the disadvantages, and then they brag about how they have better performance records because they try to take a slice of the overall students. But then on top of that, we're going to pay for religious schools. And like I said, the people who say when they had the argument, Mike, one of the justices, I think it was Kavanaugh, said. So all that's wrong with these charter schools, like the one that would be the Catholic one in Oklahoma, all that's wrong with it is religion. And the answer is yes, but that's everything that's wrong with it, because again, we have separation of powers and no one is discriminating against religion. Religions don't have to kick in to the kitty, and so they don't get to take money out of the kitty. It's really, really simple.
That's all that has to be wrong with them is religion. I mean, that's the bottom line here. Let me ask you a question about another case like this coming up that you alluded to earlier. How does that work legally? I'm asking. I'm curious. Like, so now that this has been rejected, what's the next type of case that this court may have to hear?
Well, some other state, I don't know, maybe it won't be Oklahoma, but pick any state. That state will decide that it wants to, in its charter school system, fund Catholic schools. Your local parochial school. They want to fund it. They want to authorize it as a charter school. Maybe it'll be close. They'll say, well, there won't be that much religious instruction or the religion, but it doesn't really work because the Catholics have every right in the world to have their religion and their dogma and their catechism and to teach it the way that they want to. And as long as they're going to do that, they're going to exclude non-believers. They're going to try to convert non-believers. And that is the religious instruction that under our separation of church and state, the taxpayers don't pay for. But they'll go down that road. And they'll have some argument about how it's sort of not as religious as it looks. It's more secular than it looks, even though it's a Catholic school, even though it's a yeshiva. Maybe they won't be ones that teach so much Hebrew. Maybe they'll have much more instruction in English. They'll have some argument that all of their students are completely fluent in written and spoken English. And they'll go through the court system. And if the court system says that they are not violating the federal Constitution, it'll go back to the U.S. Supreme Court, and Amy Coney Barrett, maybe no one that she knows is working on that case, the one that has to do with the yeshiva or the madrasa, and that'll go to the Supreme Court. There'll be no precedent, and the argument will be, wait, it's more like the playgrounds. It's more like the tuition add-on that's been held to be constitutional by the Supreme Court, and that this is another step along that road, which is okay, and they may come back 5-4 on that.
I guess that would make a plaintiff or somebody coming before the court more, I guess, optimistic, thinking, okay, well, we don't have Amy Coney Barrett's buddy in her alma mater.
Don't hire her friend. Whatever you do, don't hire her friend going anywhere near the U.S. Supreme Court. There used to be a thing where they would hire a certain judge just because that judge would have to recuse themselves, like a hanging judge. So you'd hire the buddy. We had this famous hanging judge here. He lived forever. And supposedly people would hire a friend of the hanging judge just so the hanging judge would recuse himself. And so the biggest hanging judge in the Central District of California, you would hope that he wouldn't be on your case.
It's amazing. I love that. I love the intricacies.
All the legal machinations, right?
Yeah. It's fascinating. But kudos to Justice Coney Barrett for doing what as you said, many don't, and recusing when she knew that it was the right thing to do. So,
RBG could have, when Obama said to her, maybe it's time to step aside, she could have recommended one of her great law clerks, the same way that Breyer did with recommending Jackson, recommended one of her law clerks, and Obama and the Senate could have put her successor on there. RBGs. I mean, she got to be very, very famous, we got Amy Coney Barrett when she didn't live as long as everyone who liked her hoped for. And then remember, they couldn't get Merrick Garland through because 10 months was way too close to the election.
It was so close to the election, David. You know that, yeah.
He died just weeks before the election, and somehow McConnell was all ready to go with Amy Coney Barrett, and they got her in weeks. When Merrick Garland, 10 months away, was way too close to a president.
It was way too close. By the way, it is why I say that Mitch McConnell,
right?
Yeah, total hypocrisy. But it's also why Mitch McConnell is a master politician. I mean, he was able to do that in two exactly opposite ways and have it be successful.
Trump said, "Where's my Roy Cohn?" And Democrats said, "Where's my Mitch McConnell?"
Right, exactly. No, it's really it was a remarkable turn of what happened there, and even still, like the way that they got Ketanji Brown Jackson meant that President Biden had Merrick Garland because he would have had Doug Jones otherwise, and it would have been a very different, I think, Attorney General and Justice Department going after Trump had it not been for Ketanji Brown Jackson. They had to make Garland the attorney general. So there was a spot on the circuit court for Ketanji Brown Jackson. And that meant that Doug Jones wasn't the right person. Had Doug Jones been there, I think we would have had a lot more action against a former president under Biden, of course.
You mean that Trump would be ranting from federal prison and not from the White House? He'd be ranting from the big house and not the White House?
Not the White House. Yeah, right. Yeah. Who knows? We don't know, but that's your little theory here from Michael Shure. Let me ask you this tonight. Speaking of our friend Trump, he is going to be at a dinner. And that dinner is what they're calling a crypto dinner that costs a ton of money to attend. It's the anonymous people who bought the Trump coin with prices varying from like 55,000 to almost 40 million. And these people are going to be there and having dinner with the president. Many of them, they say over 150, seem to be foreign. The only one we know of is of a Chinese national who now has residence in St. Kitts and Nevis. How is this legal? And I ask that very seriously. What is legal about this?
Well, the U.S. Supreme Court, cut back on bribery cases and said that you had to have a very clear quid pro quo. And 9-0, they threw out the federal convictions of, I guess he was the governor of Virginia. And boy, it sure seemed awfully smarmy to me. But they said that this money that he took and these favors that he granted, there was not enough of a clear quid pro quo for that to be a violation of federal bribery statute. So I guess Trump, I'm sure, has asked some of his lawyers. I know that he doesn't have the greatest lawyers in the world in some of these positions, but I think giving him private advice, he pays the big money and he gets the good advice. So I think he's gotten good advice from somebody that this is not a criminal violation because there's no quid pro quo. He hasn't actually said, I will give you X if you buy my cryptocurrency. And since he hasn't said that, he feels like he's not liable for criminal prosecution. There's also the issue right now that since he controls all of the levers of government, who would be the one to prosecute him? Pam Bondi with the case investigated by Kash Patel. They're much more interested in whether some congresswoman shoved somebody or not during this melee up in New Jersey than anything that Trump is doing. So I guess you say, how is this legal? I guess, we could say that those cases are wrongly decided and that this constitutes a quid pro quo. You get to have dinner with him and pitch him. The old argument always used to be that was access, that you weren't getting a favor, you were getting access.
So access is not considered quid pro quo. Is that what the case said?
The lobbying industry under Democrats as well as Republicans is based around the fact that, you or me, we can't get an audience with so-and-so, but a former Democratic Congress member can get an audience, right, with, let's say, Biden or Clinton or whoever. So this is not something that the Republicans invented, that this idea that you can get access if you're a big contributor or you're a former Congress member or so forth. And, some people would say that, me being a former assistant U.S. attorney, people pay more attention in the U.S. attorney's office to what I have to say than if I had never held that post. But I certainly don't think that that's anything. I mean, I have a right to benefit from that experience, and I have a right to be, given a little bit more access, a little bit more credibility, what I have to say. But you can see that there's a huge leap from that to what Trump is doing right now. Right. So I guess to answer your question, I don't think there's anyone who's going to prosecute him for it or criminally investigate him for it. We can certainly talk about it in the media, and it's good the media is talking about it. And it certainly stinks to high heaven. But Trump has moved beyond the point. I mean, all of it stinks to high heaven. The plane for $400 million that he's conniving.
Very little doesn't.
No. Somehow it's going to go to the presidential library, but he's obviously conniving all this time to figure out some way that he can fly it. And if it takes $1 billion of the taxpayers' money to fix it up and it's not ready for 3 years, perfect, just in time for him to go check it out at the Trump Presidential Library and fly around on it all the time. He's utterly transparent. And you just think that these poor folks, especially when the economy goes down, Michael, when the economy goes down, and there he is standing next to Musk and the other ones and holding all these billions of dollars while the poor people are suffering Their Medicaid's getting canceled. The rural hospitals are closing down. This Medicaid thing, if I can just say one thing, this idea that able-bodied people have to work and what's the big deal? Well, first of all, while the able-bodied people are proving that they can work or finding jobs, millions will lose their Medicaid coverage, and so will their families and so forth. And then, dealing with bureaucratic agencies that, don't answer the phone and that don't do anything right. And, you're the guy who's working odd jobs. You're never going to prove to them that you're working enough to get your Medicaid benefits. You're going to be busting your ass out there working. You're going to be a Trump voter. You're going to be his kind of guy, his kind of gal. And he's going to cut your Medicaid, and then the hospital that you're used to going to or the clinic you're used to going to, there aren't enough people in that area with them getting cut back on Medicaid that hospital or clinic will stay open. You'll be driving miles and miles. Your jalopy is not going to be working that great. This is so awful for the Trump voters. This is a betrayal of his own voters on an epic scale. And his base will figure that out. He'll figure it out when it hurts. And it's really a pity it has to hurt, because if Harris were in there, it wouldn't hurt the Trump voters the way Trump is about to hurt them. And it's a terrible thing, because I have a big heart and I don't want to see any of them hurt, but I'm just predicting the future, I think, pretty accurately on this one. He's really going to hurt his own voters.
There's very little precedent in American electoral history for people voting against their own interests as there was in 2024. Whether you liked Kamala Harris or not, the MAGA people are the people that in today's big, beautiful bill are being trashed. They're being hurt so much. And I'm not talking about obviously the wealthy and the corporate people who support a Republican president. I'm talking about the people that go to rallies and get in cars and they move, like migrants across the country to see this guy during that campaign. The type of people that come out who I got a chance to speak to over and over and over again. These are the people that are being hurt by today's bill and by an us versus them mentality that informs this White House and this president, and they don't know it. And I know what you mean. You feel badly for them.
Mike, you should really write a book, because you had that experience of seeing that campaign unfold, and you saw something really remarkable. Who were those two who wrote that famous book? Was it about Clinton? But you got a book in you, dude.
Yeah. All right. Well, there is a book. There are two books I want to write, and that's one of them, and I should. And all right, now there's pressure. There's pressure from David Katz. He's eligible for the Hall of Fame. How do I argue? And I will buy the Katz coin. By the way, you were talking about that my influence as a former U.S. attorney or district attorney. Well, if you start selling Katz coins, I'm going to buy Katz coins.
Well, if you get your book out by Christmas, I promise I'll order a few, because I find that thing interesting. I mean, not turning it on every night. I'm sure you heard the same speech over and over again, but still different things that happened in different places. And
no question. And the speech wasn't what mattered. I always found that a lot of those people were there for the tailgate more than they were for the game. And what he said under that roof didn't matter as much as what was happening in the parking lot after and before. So, yeah. Okay.
We have a few minutes to talk about the saga of Trevor Kirk, or it's not that interesting to your viewers. He's the police sheriff in California.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Trevor Kirk story is fascinating, and I don't think you could talk about anything here that would not be fascinating to our viewers, to be frank. So this is that case in Lancaster, California.
I checked a half an hour before we went on the air, and there's no ruling from the federal district judge yet about it. The facts are that a deputy sheriff goes to Lancaster. It's far north, but it's part of LA County, but it's far north. It's not the image that people have of, Beverly Hills or downtown LA. So this deputy sheriff goes out there with a partner. Two of them go out there on a robbery call to this exurb called Lancaster. And this woman is there. And the minute that the sheriffs arrive, she's taking a photo. She's taking a YouTube video with her camera. And I'm sure she has a little bit of attitude, which she has every right to do. This is the First Amendment. This is a free country. And she's saying something like, I got this on YouTube, and you better be sure you give the accused his rights, tell him what he's been arrested for. And apparently this deputy gets out there and he takes one look at her and hears what she has to say, and he goes into a fury. And at least according to the evidence presented at trial, he doesn't give her any commands. He throws her to the ground. He handcuffs her. He shoots pepper spray in her face at least twice. And all of this is on camera because she was indeed filming, and they've got this film. So with this kind of evidence, and you sort of need this even currently to prosecute a police officer or sheriff, they have this open and shut case on video from their point of view against him. So he's prosecuted, and he's offered a misdemeanor, and he won't take the misdemeanor, the federal misdemeanor. He wants to go to trial. So he goes to trial, and they show the video, and he loses. And so in February, he's found guilty of this use of excessive force and assault with a deadly weapon, because under the code, it is a deadly weapon, pepper spray. And she's rushed to the hospital. She sustained injuries. She files a civil suit. So now we're in February, and Trump is, getting inaugurated January 20th. Within a couple of months, he's hired a new U.S. attorney. Not like I was an assistant U.S. attorney. I had a supervisory position there for a while, but he was the U.S. attorney chosen by the president, this new one. And this new Trumpy one comes in, manages my old office, and says, no, we're not proceeding on this case. We're going to make him the same old plea offer we made him before the trial, and we're going to give him a misdemeanor. And the cherry on top is we're going to recommend that he get no jail time. Now, it's been reported that his probation report, prepared by the federal probation officer, which is part of the federal court system, the probation officer has looked at both sides, at all sides of this, and his or her recommendation is like a 6-year prison sentence. Now they're going to make a new plea agreement that knocks this down to a misdemeanor, and that says that the government is going to ask for no time. So the three assistant U.S. attorneys who prosecuted this case before the jury and got the guilty felony verdict in federal court, they all quit. So it's another case like that Mayor Adams case in New York City, where the career assistant U.S. attorneys who know this case inside and out said, I can't live with this. I quit. I'm not signing anything. And the supervisor quits. And that leaves the new Trumpy U.S. attorney to go find someone in the U.S. attorney's office who will sign this plea agreement offering him a mere misdemeanor and no jail time. And as fate would have it, that's a prosecutor that I have on a big white collar case of mine for years. So suddenly I have this case, which is not newsworthy, and I have the most famous assistant U.S. attorney in America on my case. Interesting. His name is Rob Keenan. Nice guy. Rob Keenan signs these papers, and Rob Keenan ends up in federal court on Monday in a 2-hour hearing with this federal judge who keeps saying, wait a second, I was here. I heard the evidence. I saw the videotape. I've had a motion that I should acquit this deputy sheriff. I've denied it. I don't see any basis why you guys are going to change what the jury did, in which I saw. I'm about ready to proceed with sentencing of this deputy sheriff. So they have a 2-hour knockdown drag out, and all the friends of the deputy sheriff are there. Our former sheriff Villanueva is in the courtroom. Our current sheriff is in the courtroom. This Trumpy new U.S. attorney himself is in the courtroom. He apparently gets into it with the civil attorney for the black lady who was pepper sprayed and thrown to the ground. And he says, you can be removed from the courtroom. And she's saying, you're not the judge. You can remove me from the courtroom. Apparently, it was a hearing for the ages. Unfortunately, I wasn't there. The journalist in me would have loved to have been there. And now the judge has taken it under submission and is going to rule supposedly later this week. So the prosecutor, this Rob Keenan that I've had this case with now for years, nothing to do with this whatsoever.
Right.
He says, we were thinking of doing 3 things with this case. Just leave it alone, and you impose the sentence that you impose. I guess we would ask for a lower sentence, a much lower sentence. If the probation is going to ask for 6 years and he's going to ask for no time.
Zero. Yeah.
Time at all. That's a little different. Or we're going to come and do what we're doing, which is say, you know what, you should give him throw out the jury verdict, throw out the felony. She wasn't injured. Apparently, as soon as he says she wasn't injured, everybody goes crazy in the courtroom because the lady is there testifying. She's allowed to make her victim impact statement about how she was rushed to the hospital. Of course, she was injured. Right. What are they talking about? Pepper sprays in the eyes. Pepper spray is a deadly weapon under California definitional law. or we could drop the whole case. Now, this is what I think is really interesting for your viewers, and I want to touch on this. This gets us to Mayor Adams. The federal government does have a right under the separation of powers. They're the only agency that prosecutes. Congress has the power of purse. They do what they do. The courts decide all sorts of interesting things. But who prosecutes? There was a special prosecutor under statute for a while, and we have, Jack Smith, how he became a prosecutor. But basically, the president of the United States, especially under this unitary executive theory, that's the one, the executive branch, the U.S. attorney. There's nobody else to prosecute. So if the judge says, like in the Mayor Adams case, who would have actually tried Mayor Adams, right? If the judge had said, I'm not dismissing this case. But this one's an anomaly, Mike. This one's different because there's already a probation report. There's already been a trial, okay? All that has to happen now is the sentencing. If the government says, we don't want to participate, the judge can say, good, don't participate. I'm reading the probation report. I was here for the trial. I'm ready to sentence the person. And another irony is that there used to be a judge in federal court when I was an assistant U.S. attorney who didn't want to hear from us at sentencing. He said, you know what? I've read the probation report. I've been doing this for decades. I don't need to hear from the government. So he didn't hear from the government at all. So the idea that it's not proper to have this sentencing, the judge could go ahead and sentence. And then the interesting thing, which I'm dying to see, and I think what's going to happen, by the way, the judge in the case is a Republican appointed by Reagan, but he's, so far as I can see right now, he's getting this one right. I think he's going to say, no, I'm ready to go ahead with sentencing. The jury found him guilty of a felony in front of me. I've got a report from probation. If the government would like to make a recommendation why I shouldn't give the much higher sentence recommended by the probation department, I'll hear what you have to say. If you don't want to participate, don't participate. And then it would go up on appeal, right? And I guess if the government doesn't want to defend it on appeal, I don't know. I guess the Court of Appeals, I think, has the power to appoint a special prosecutor just for the purpose of filing a brief. That's what the judge in New York did with the Mayor Adams case. He did appoint an outside attorney that he had high regard for to file a brief to tell him, what should I do in this situation? I think the Ninth Circuit could appoint a lawyer to say, here's what you ought to do in this situation. And I suppose the real question is, was it a fair trial? And if it was a fair trial, the Ninth Circuit could affirm the conviction. They could affirm the sentence. And so there's that option. And so what my adversary, Rob Keenan, what he told the court was, we also considered a third option, Your Honor, which was just to dismiss the case entirely. And apparently they would have the power to dismiss the case entirely.
Even if a jury has ruled, even if a jury has already given a decision?
Very hard to figure out. That's a great question. And it's a very interesting legal issue. And then by saying that dismiss the case entirely, he's sort of telling the judge, right? He didn't ask to dismiss the case entirely, but he also made it clear what they might do if the judge says, no, I'm not going to do this misdemeanor deal. I'm going to sentence him. I'm ready to go with the sentencing. That's going to be June 3rd is going to be the sentencing if they go ahead with the sentencing, which I think is what the judge is going to do. I'm putting my Katsadamus on the line here, but I think that's what the judge is going to do. And then the question is, does Trump pardon him? Now, if he pardons him, that's it. Game over, right? He could have been convicted. He could be about to go into prison.
And that's
Trump pardoned some people who had one step outside the prison gate and one step in the prison gate. He yanked some of these people back right out of prison, and he yanked some of these people directly out of the prison. They weren't 1 foot in the prison and out of the prison. They were both feet in the prison, incarcerated. He cut some of those people loose. I think that Trump does not want the juxtaposition of Trump talking about how he's against this and he's against that, and they show that tape. The fact that there's a tape, and you can see that woman just jumped on. She's not given any commands. She's not told to stop. She's not told, calm it down. He sees what's going on, the deputy sheriff. He jumps on her. He throws her to the ground. He pepper sprays her. They argued in court. My adversary, this Rob Keenan, apparently argued in court. He said, you got to say this. The deputy sheriff certainly didn't have good communication skills. Wow. Is that the understatement of all time?
That is the understatement of all time. No
communication skills. He had attacked this woman who hadn't attacked him or done anything. He had a right to use any force against her at all. He didn't just have a lack of communication skills. So that's what's happening. And the case really should have a lot more publicity. But it happened here in LA. It happened a while ago, back in 2023, and she didn't die. She didn't sustain,
right. And I would argue too that the more publicity it has, the more likely the president would be, and I guess sort of inclined to get involved. I think if it's a low-level case, perhaps he would want to stay out of it because it just
Villanueva and his other people supposedly made a big issue of this. And the new U.S. attorney, while he is himself a former assistant U.S. attorney like me from that office, he didn't follow the normal career path after the U.S. attorney's office. He ran for a state political office, and he was elected as a Republican, very law and order, out in Riverside or someplace like that, a very Republican area. And then he was a very Trumpy legislator. And then Trump picked him, I think, much more as a Trumpy legislator than he picked him as a distinguished former assistant U.S. attorney, which normally is the way you become the U.S. attorney. You're someone who really stood out and got great acclaim legally. I don't think they've ever picked a former politician. Can I digress with one last thing?
Of course you can. This is your courtroom.
Thank you. I was hired by Steve Trott in 1983 to be an assistant U.S. attorney. And Steve Trott was distinguished in several ways. He had been a deputy district attorney, and he'd been up in those days to be the district attorney. He lost out to someone named Robert Filibosian, and he was an incredibly talented person. And Reagan said, I don't care if he wasn't a federal prosecutor. He was a state prosecutor. He did all of these big cases. I think he'd worked on Manson. Then he had two crazy brothers or cousins who'd done some horrible thing, and he'd gotten them both convicted. I mean, Steve Trott was the real deal as a prosecutor. And he became the U.S. attorney, even though he'd never been an assistant U.S. attorney. I think he's the only one. I know what you're going to say. Judge Janine Pirot has never been a federal prosecutor.
I was about to mention.
Never, ever be mentioned in the same sentence as Judge Janine Pirot. So after he was the U.S. attorney and I was in love with him and I was looking forward to working for him all those years that I signed on for, he went off to become a huge Justice Department official just months after I started. And then he has been a judge on the Ninth Circuit, and he's still a judge on the Ninth Circuit. So the point that I'm making is that you can come not from the normal route. So I don't hold that against him. But this new U.S. attorney, Mike, has really taken, I think, an extreme position on this case. And so here's my prediction. My prediction, and the judge hasn't ruled yet.
Well, we're all waiting to bet on.
Okay. I think that this federal judge is not going to throw out the felony jury verdict.
Right.
I think that he is going to go ahead and sentence on June 3rd. I think that he's probably going to give him some prison time, but not as much as probation's asking for, but also not no time. I think he's going to give him bail pending appeal so that the police officer doesn't actually go into prison just in case the judge is wrong. And that's going to go up to the Ninth Circuit like that, with him sentenced on the felony, with him sentenced to some time in prison, but with bail pending appeal. And then the Ninth Circuit will unravel all of this. And I don't think that Trump, at least for now, if the guy's not actually incarcerated, which he wouldn't be under my prediction, I don't think that Trump will actually spend his political capital on giving this guy a pardon and having that videotape shown, because then the videotape would be shown in an endless loop on television along with Trump's pardon. How could you pardon something like this? This was so beyond the pale for an officer.
Well, there's a little bit of video from January 6th too, David, and he found a way to pardon those people too. So I'm never say never.
That became so integral to him. Even with J.D. Vance saying we'll never pardon any of the violent ones, and the senator saying we'll never pardon the ones who attacked a police officer. He did all of that.
Of course he did.
He pardoned them up to the worst of the worst, the double-digit sentence people. But he had gotten way too invested in that one.
He had, and those were, and it's different. I know. I was just saying that when you think video is going to happen, and
Mark always says that to me.
Yeah.
But if Mark's watching, he's laughing right now. He's saying, Katz is right on all these things, but to be all the way right, we got to see Abrego Garcia. Abrego Garcia has to be back on American soil. That one's still pending.
That's pending, but there's no expiration, right? I mean, Katsadamas is it doesn't have a deadline. So did you see? By the way, I don't know if this is a new thing or not, but it's the first time I'd seen the Katsadamas portrait that was just on the screen.
Beautiful likeness.
It is a beautiful likeness. It's fantastic. Well, there he is, David Katz. Man, I could.
I used to wear my glasses more before my cataract surgery.
Oh,
I
okay.
wear my glasses more. So here we go.
So there you go. And that's the Katsadamas we all know, right?
Never had a beard. Never had a beard, but Nostradamus.
You can borrow mine.
But Nostradamus did.
Nostradamus did, because you have to go like this, I think, if you. But thank you. I tell you, I enjoy our time together every single Thursday that I do this, and it's really been a pleasure. And I also feel relieved because I know so much more about all of these cases, certainly the Trevor Kirk, but also the way that they approach these things in the Supreme Court and the recusal and all that than I did before we started our chat. So thank you. Have a great weekend. Mark will be back here with you next Thursday, and by then maybe we'll know a little bit about the judge, as they say it could happen today or tomorrow, what the judge did in the Trevor Kirk case as well.
Great to be with you.
All right, folks, yes, that's what I was going to ask for, the applause for David Katz. He's well deserving of them. We have come to the end of the show. There was something
already?
Have we not? Doesn't it look like we have?
That's it? Yeah, party over.
But I will say that there was something that Myra said something about having contacted her representative, even a Republican. She knows it's a waste of time. I can't find it. It is never, ever, ever, ever a waste of time to contact your elected officials, because that is how you get your point across, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. Those things have cumulative effects, and it's not a waste of your time. I contacted Republican representatives here in South Carolina. I know I'm wasting my time, but I do it anyway. You're right about everything in that, except that you're wrong about the fact that you're wasting your time, Myra. That is what you have to do. Anyway, thank you to everyone this week. Thank you for everyone in this chat. Thank you to David Katz. Thank you to Kim and Albert, of course. We didn't get to 48 seconds of sports, but that's my way of saying I don't have 48 seconds to give to the NBA. It's me. Everybody, Mark will be back Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.